you're not able to see. Hello,
I was
Arobi.
like, what's gonna happen? I don't know what's gonna happen. Okay. Sorry for the delay, everyone.
Not at all, not at all. So good morning, everyone. It's lovely, absolutely a delight to see everyone over here today. And I can see two lovely faces, Simone and Adina. That's it. I'm not able to see others. I hope you all are there. Todd has just mentioned that he's on audio, but I hope to see some more faces, isn't it, Adina? It will be great.
Well, it's early in the morning here, so people want to keep them off. It's okay.
Sure, sure. Okay. So shall we start in that case? I think it will
Let's
be
let's dive in.
super, super. So a warm, warm welcome, a very good morning to everyone and good evening from India. So, it's lovely to see, Adina, finally we meet. We have been planning this for a long time.
Yep.
And Simon, thank you so much. You are the first one. So clap, clap, clap for you, really. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. You're welcome. I jumped at the opportunity.
Lovely, lovely. So I of course wanted to ask everyone from which part of the world they are who are logging in, but I'm not seeing their faces. So I hope someone writes in the comment box. That will be good to see. Where are you logging in
I'm sorry.
from?
I'm not having much success connecting my video.
Sure, sure. I understand, Todd. But it will be good to see in the comment box from where all in this place, in this world are you logging in from. So it just gives us a good taste of the variety of people here. Baltimore, yeah.
Yeah, I decided to log in from outside instead of staying home with my computer. So I'm only on my phone. That's the issue.
I understand, Todd. No worries. So there's someone, Janet from Texas, Peyton from Wisconsin. Wow, lovely. Who else? There's
Florida, nice.
commenting. So I guess this webinar of ours is of course attracting a lot of people from the publishing world. So I'm pretty sure that everyone over here who's present in the room today are linked to the publishing print side in some form or the other. So it will be great to hear again from you all what kind of profession you all are into, what kind of work you all are doing.
Are you opening the floor to us?
You can mention it in the comment box.
Oh, in the comments. Okay. If I can get to it.
Yeah, I'm sure Adina also will be very happy to see the kind of different professionals we have in the room. It just helps us to navigate the entire show. So folks, feel free to comment in the box from where you are and what kind of profession you are into. The good part is most of them, Adina, are from the LinkedIn connects. A few from outside. A lot of people have sent me questions also. So we have a fair view about what they do. But it will be good to have an engagement here as well. So that's the reason we would love to know what you do. Yes, I can see some responses. Great. Okay. Book editing. That's good. Editorial assistant, copy editor. Okay, we already have a question here. So Robert, we'll take all the questions at the end. I have received a number of questions, which I'll be taking ahead with Adina today, and then we'll reserve some time at the end, to take your questions. So I'll open the floor that time. Yeah. So basic rules, of course, keep yourself muted, except for Adina and myself, of course, and use the comment box at the end, not during the session, because that will just help us to take the entire session properly ahead. I'm sure you are going to find a lot of these questions very interesting, but reserve your questions at the end, and we can take it from there. Yeah. So I take this opportunity, number one, to introduce Adina to us. Adina is a book editor based in Baltimore, MD. Her business, Edelman Edits, helps authors and small publishing companies mine their message, unearthing the gold in every story. Wow. And it is not just about the grammar checks, the sentence rephrasing, nothing at all. The punctuations, which are very fundamental and basics, as she always tells me. Adina works with the Israel Bookshop, Circle Publishing, Mosiata Press, Menusha Publishers, and many more. So you can find out more about her editing services at edelmanedits.com. That's her website. And of course, she's there on LinkedIn as well. So please do connect with her, and I'm sure you're going to get loads and loads of wisdom in the field of editing what she does. So a big round of applause, a warm welcome to Adina. Clap, clap, clap. Okay. So before we start, Adina, you want to say something before we roll it out? All yours.
I'm just very grateful for everyone who showed up, and I think we should just dive right in. Let's get started.
Super. Absolutely. Let's start this. So $1 million question, but tell us something about your journey as a book editor. How did it start? How did you take up this career in the first place, Adina?
A lot of editors starting off in the field, or I get a lot of connection requests from people just starting out in publishing, and they want to hear about how to get started and how to sort of enter the industry. And I mean, really, I'm kind of a boring story of I wanted to become a book editor, and I got a BA in English and creative writing, and I just started networking. So in that way, it's kind of a boring origin story. But it really started in high school of really deciding that I want to work with this specific area of the field. I've always been a reader. I've always enjoyed writing, but I didn't want to turn writing into a career because some people are able to do it under stressful timelines. I'm not. And I really wanted to keep it something that was not stressful and just as a creative outlet for myself. And instead, I just love helping authors with their stories and being able to help them take it for something that's kind of rough and messy and turn it into something that's publish worthy. And I also specifically, as an Orthodox Jew, really wanted to enhance Jewish literature, which has an entire different, different genre requirements and a lot of different things. So that's something that really got me into the field and getting some of that experience. And now I work with both Jewish authors and non-Jewish authors.
Awesome, awesome. It's a great way to start, isn't it? So how does a typical day in your life looks like, Adina? How do you start? When do you start? What do you do? It's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a mix. It's not a 9 to 5 job with a clear set of this is what happens every day. It changes day to day and week to week. But in general, it's gonna be a mix of the actual editing work, a mix of calls, whether it's networking calls, potential client calls, or actual client calls, and then also marketing. So that means spending time on LinkedIn, messaging people, commenting on posts, that kind of thing. So the most exciting stuff would be actually working on the editing and working on the books. But something that I really, really enjoy is the calls with my authors, because that always ends up being just great fun of going over feedback or figuring out what needs work and how to do that. And that's always like a highlight whenever those comes up.
Sure, sure. I'm sure, Adina, it's all customized. It's all about, a very uniqueness in each of the books which you must be editing. But according to you, I mean, what do you think is a good quality of a book in terms of an editing being done? How would what would you see in that book from a good quality edited book?
Yeah. And this is partly why I do sample edits before I take on a project, because I want to see if it's something that is going to be a good quality and something that I am interested in spending time on and that I think has a good chance of either in self-publishing world or if they want to try to do a traditional publishing route. But this really comes down to two things for me. One is voice which is sort of an elusive writing element, but something that's so important for any writer to develop. And it's something that, you know, as soon as you read the first paragraph of anything, you'll be able to hear that voice. And if you don't, that means that the writer hasn't developed it well enough. But as soon as I hear like a distinctive voice, that tells me that, oh, this writer has come along pretty far and this book can do quite well, because it'll speak much better to the reader. And then another thing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is that it has some sort of point or some sort of message. And even if it's like a fun, you know, fiction novel, it still has to be more than just like, oh, this is just for fun. Like there has to be some underlying reason for writing it, some, you know, more than just like, oh, I just had this idea and I spat it out. Like it has to be more thought through than that. So that's those two things, voice and message, like need to be there. And for me, that's like always like, oh, if I see those two things, then this is gonna work.
Super, absolutely. I'm sure you'll agree with one part, Adina, that, you know, as time goes, things always evolve. You know, thinking of 25 years back or maybe 50 years back to now, you know, things have completely changed. You know, it largely depends on the consumer behavior, the reading patterns, what they like. So how do you think has it evolved really? I mean, how would you see an editor of 10 years back to now? What does he see in terms of editing it?
That's interesting. I mean, technology has had a huge impact, which we all know. I think just like the whole editing process has evolved, like just by having, you know, Microsoft Word and being able to do track changes and leave comments in a much faster way, as opposed to, you know, printing out that manuscript and putting the inline edits with a pen or a pencil. Like it's just a very different process in that regard. But also I just, you know, the self-publishing world, the fact that that's come about has had a huge impact on the fact of like how many books are published a day, on the type of quality of books coming out, the fact that there's less bookstores now because more people are buying online, or it's just, you know, it's very different. So, you know, it's also that because of self-publishing, that whole thing that's come about, a lot of editors that used to work for traditional publishers have now left and started their own, you know, business, their own freelancing, in order to work with self-publishing authors. Because in that way, they get to pick what books they want to work on. They don't have anyone on top of them. You know, it's a different dynamic. So it's developed a lot. I'm interested to see how it'll continue to develop. But you know, there's no question that the value and the role of an editor is still firmly in place.
Absolutely. Since you mentioned technology, something which just came to my mind, Adina, is we are living in the era of AI, as we all know. You know, it's all across artificial intelligence, and the chat GPTs of the world are just storming into our desktops and the bookstores everywhere, you know. How do you think AI would not affect, how would the role of an editor evolve in the times to come again? Because you mentioned technology.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, you see all these posts everywhere of like, will AI affect my job? And I think from the copywriters the most, you see that they're super not concerned, because of because AI just has nothing on them at this moment in time. I like when it comes to editing, there is a technical side of editing that copy editors deal with that, yes, once ChatGPT actually learns properly Chicago Manual style or the other style guides and actually knows how to apply it, then okay, maybe then that might be a concern. But there's so much more to editing. You know, as we mentioned in the beginning, there's so much more to editing than just the grammar and the punctuation. And that I really firmly believe is something that AI just cannot take over. So I don't know, maybe in 100 years, but like by then I don't think I'll be worrying about that. So it's like I'm not I'm not worried.
Oh, well said. I completely agree with you on that front. So, what any kind of special, specific genres you specialize into for editing? What's your domain expertise?
Yeah, so I do memoir and I do certain genres of fiction, like sci-fi, fantasy, middle grade, historical mystery, those forms. I steer very far away from romance. I don't do horror. Usually just the more not graphic type of things. But yeah, I used to do business books. I used to do self-help. At a certain point, I lost interest in it. I'm much more story focused. And so working with books that maybe have a very important message are all well and good, but I'd rather authors work with an editor who feel very passionately about what they're working on. And I don't feel passionate about self-help books. So
Get a point. Adina, basically, when it comes to creativity, whether you are a graphic designer, anyone in the field of a lot of brain work, uh, it's very tough to have a pattern, that I will always think this way, I'll always write that way. But in editing, I'm sure there are some steps, there is some methodology, there is some pattern of working. Would you want to throw some light on that front as to how you go about when someone gives you a manuscript, or a Word doc saying that, hey, I need editing to be done, Adina. So what are your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps?
it's different for every type of edit. There's big picture editing, what's called developmental or substantive editing. There's a lot of different names for it. There's line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. And each stage has a different process, I would say, and different things that you look for and a different way of going about it. I'll speak on line editing and copy editing just because that's what authors think of editing as the most. Usually they're not as familiar with developmental editing, and proofreading is also yeah. I'll just stick with line editing and copy editing for now. Some editors will stick the two together, like me. I'll perform a line edit and copy edit at the same time. Some people, like Jeanette, who's here, she'll just do copy editing. And they are different in that a line edit is more artistic and looking at the sound of the sentence and how it flows, and the best way to phrase it. And copy edit will look more at the mechanics and the like, I don't want to use the word dry, but a little bit more of the dry form of editing. So when I'm performing both, in which I feel is just how my mind works. If I tie it together, like I feel like one has to affect the other. So I'll do 2 passes within the first round. So that means that the first pass, the first time I'm going through the manuscript, I'll immediately start marking up the manuscript. I'll start making comments. I'll start editing it. And then I'll go through it again and make sure everything is like I'm cleaning up the work. I usually turn on, if you look under like review in the Word tab, and there's ways to show like all markup or simple markup or no markup. And I'll turn on the simple or no markup, and so I won't see my edits, and I'll go through it again, and I can make sure everything's clean. I'll edit my comments because usually the first time around they're either incomplete or they're a little bit blunt or a lot blunt. And then I'll give it to the author to revise. And then usually we'll go through that entire process one more time. If the manuscript really needs it, we'll do it as many times as needed. Especially like for a publisher, we'll just keep going until it's done, or until we run out of time. But usually it just needs those 2 rounds of 2 passes each. And yeah, and then also another important part is the editorial letter, where I make an outline of things that are working and things that are not working, and that just gives a more concise place for the author to look and see, oh, like this is what I need to work on, and often I'll include suggestions of how to go about that. And we'll also discuss that on a follow-up call after each round.
Sure. Once I was discussing with someone, and he said that, Rajneesh, when you write a book, make sure it is edited well, because it will make your book more like yours when it is proper. So it was a lovely statement made, and I thought maintaining the author's voice is very crucial. And I'm sure when you edit, you would find a lot of gaps in between. Do you always worry that maybe whatever I do may not have the same voice of the original writer, the author? Is that something which troubles you, Adina? And how would you address it if that's the case?
Yeah, it's always something I have to be aware of because it's very easy to just put in the words that I want to use.
Yeah.
I think it's hardest when I don't have full trust that the author can do the revisions,
Mhm.
because then I'll feel more inclined to just stick in what I think would be good, which would be good, but that's not what the author's voice would be, and then it's no longer their book. So that's always the danger zone. Um, and I think it's also, I mean, so much of it comes down to word choice and punctuation. That's often, two things that really help show voice. And let's say an author has a very stream of consciousness like way of writing. So there is often a lack of clarity there, but there's also a very distinct style and tone there as well. So my job is to go in and make sure that that same sound of the sentence remains, but while being grammatically correct. Thankfully, there is punctuation that allows for that.
Mhm.
It obviously will be tweaked a little bit. But then I would leave a comment and ask the author to look over this and see, do they still feel like it's in their voice? Or when making, any sort of big sentence revision, I'll either, in a comment, leave a suggestion of like, oh, maybe try this, and then they can adapt it or change it how they will. Or if I change it like on paper, I'll leave that comment and have them look over it. And at any point, it's all on track changes, so they can see what I've done. And if they feel like anything has crossed the line or they don't feel like their voice is there anymore, they can change that. Um, but it's definitely something to be careful of. One thing I've found that's very helpful, and as an editor and as a writer, is to make sure that I have time for my own writing. Because otherwise, if I haven't written in a while and I haven't made time for that, then I'll feel that greater desire to sort of take over the client's work, which is not okay.
Yeah.
So if I make that time for myself, then I just feel less of that need to insert myself into their work.
Excellent, excellent. Absolutely. It's a delight to hear from you on all this.
Mm.
I was thinking that that question came to me because from a, writer's perspective, that question was that I want to ensure that my voice is maintained. But now
Yeah.
let's see the shoes of an editor like you. What are your, basically biggest challenges? If you can, highlight about three challenges when you work on your editing, what would they be?
Um, I think so there's like two categories. One would be like just the actual editing. Sometimes you come across things that you just don't know. Should this hyphen go here, or is this comma actually supposed to be here? And that's why the awesome editing group I'm a part of is really helpful for that, because we'll drop sentences and ask for help. But that's a little bit less um of a difficulty because it's sort of just like me and the writing. So it's like, I'm not dealing with people. So the other category would be dealing with people and dealing with an author who has a difficult time relinquishing control of their work, like in terms of accepting feedback, in terms of changing things. That can be very difficult if a change really does need to be made to make the book better and they just don't want to. So that can get very tricky. In general, like thankfully, I have not worked with any authors who are like, will say like, oh, I didn't accept anything. Like some people have horror stories like that. Thankfully, I haven't. But it's natural for an author to be like, oh, I don't know if this suggestion is right,
Yeah,
and I don't want to accept it. And sometimes, it turns out that that's good that they didn't want to accept it because I'm not right 100% of the time.
sure.
But there has to be that willingness to accept feedback and be open to changing up their words.
Okay, so flexibility is needed, and you can't be very stubborn in how the things are. So your suggestions should be welcome. I completely buy this point. So that gets me to something a step before. What do you think is an ideal
She
manuscript?
doesn't.
Here again, I would say I know it is very customized. It is genre specific. It is the voice of the author. But how would you want an ideal manuscript to come to you?
Um, so the best way to put it is that it should be a manuscript and not a rough draft. A
Mhm.
lot of authors will finish their draft and they say, okay, now it's ready for an editor, and it's not. They need to take a couple months at least away from the manuscript. They need to self-edit it, which if anyone's been following my posts, I've been talking about that a lot recently. And they need to do like a few rounds of that in order to make sure that they're putting out their best work and they're submitting their work to an editor that's, they've already done what they can on it, and therefore they're getting the best value out of whatever they're going to pay the editor. So it's, it can't just be, I finished the draft and now here, work on it.
Sure, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So that gets me to a question to ask you, what's your favorite success story? Something which is very memorable. Some book which you did was absolutely a delight to work upon. It just went like water, smooth sailing, as they say. Or am I asking for a bit too much from you?
Smooth sailing. There definitely were projects like that. I mean, like I've worked on proofreads before that go very quickly, but I'm also not emotionally involved with them, so I wouldn't really think of those and place that in that scenario. One project that comes to mind that was very smooth in the sense that it did not need like a bucket load of work, and the author was very open with whatever revisions were made, and it was also just a very pleasant editing experience. I worked on a memoir by Devoy Cramen called Even If I'm Not. Very, very intense, it was very emotionally difficult, but it was pretty smooth in terms of just getting the editing done and speaking with the author. And the timeline was not crazy. So that was, I guess, what I would call one of the smoothest.
So a dream situation to be in, actually, isn't it?
Say it again.
It's a dream situation to be in, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And it does not come every time or often. So.
So again, Adina, from a creative perspective, this question comes to you that, unless you don't feed your brains with the right inputs, the right outputs are very difficult to, emerge from there. So in terms of your work, are you taking any particular attention to, feeding yourself with trends, with resources, with community? What do you do to make sure that you're aware about what's happening so that reflects in your work as well? Anything particular?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that reading like writing and editing craft books. And that's something that definitely affects my ability of editing in general. The things that I, see in a client's work. It has affected my own writing, but that's, that ties into my ability to comment on someone else's writing. So like I remember like right now I'm reading Inside Story by Dara Marks, and that's really for screenwriters, but it like all her concepts can be applied to fiction work as well. And she just goes into a lot of depth and clarity of how, theme, character, and plot are all tied together, and how to make sure that they're all working. And that's something that now, whenever I read a book and whenever I'm editing someone's book, those things are running through my head, and I'm looking at how it surfaces in this manuscript. So books like that are definitely huge in terms of resources and continuing education, we could say. I'm also subscribed to Poets and Writers, and I appreciate how they often talk about things happening in the publishing world. The editing group I'm a part of sometimes will share resources and other publishing news that are relevant to whatever we're working on. So it's definitely it's not like I'm stuck in 3 years ago when I first started. It's always more learning.
And that's very crucial, isn't it? Because, very often we feel that we read so many books, so many articles, we listen to so many podcasts. Where on earth does it go in the brain? Because we always struggle to say, okay, what did I read in that book?
Right.
What key takeaways? And we'll struggle. But believe me or not, Adina, the other day I was talking to an author about a client, sorry, about empathy as a very crucial trait for leadership. And the first story which came to me, in my mind, which I had read about it some months, probably years back, was on Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, who was asked in his first interview that, if you see a baby, lying on the street crying, what would you do? And he said that, I'll call up 911. So the interviewer actually said that, well, that's not entirely wrong, But the first thing you are expected to do is pick up the baby, hold it near to you, and then look out for the parents. So I think
Yeah,
that's what the empathy lesson is all about. Superb,
that's it.
absolutely good to hear that.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, and that point about like it's hard to keep things in the brain and remember what did we even read in the book. I mean that's why it's always helpful to put in the little tabs and to underline important things that spoke out to you from the book. That's great. I also do, if I don't own the book, let's say I borrowed it from the library, which I do often, I keep a like a digital file and I write up the lines that I think were like big takeaways for me. And that's like another way to remember like, oh yeah, I gained from this book. But also like, even if you reread a book that you read before, one of these craft books, there are things that you come across and you're like, did I read this before? I don't remember. This is like really good advice, so it's good to even, go back into it again.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm a big fan of visual memory, really. So you'll
mhm.
find my books with a lot of scribbles and highlights and notes and some funny things written on it, because that helps me take back whenever I wish to. And the brain is very funny. It will flash you, oh, you have read that, and then you feel very happy about it.
Yeah, that's great.
This is an interesting question, Adina. If you had to edit the autobiography of a fictional character, who would it be and why?
I've never heard this question before. Um, there's like, there's always more than one, but one that really I think sticks out to me is King Arthur. I was always like into Arthurian legend. I did my 12th grade research paper on Arthurian legend. I'm a big fan of Gerald Moore's Squire's Tale series. It's something that I highly recommend reading. Um, and I think it would just be really interesting to edit his autobiography. That would be very cool.
Lovely. So what that gets us to, what's the funniest or the most unusual editing request you have ever had?
Um,
Something very funny.
I once had an author, I think I asked her to revise a scene in some way, and she said, I don't remember the story. Can you just write it for me? Besides for the fact that like that's not what editors do, it just it struck me as very amusing that there could be a writer of fiction who doesn't remember their story or care about it enough to want to finish the scene or revise the scene. So that was, yeah.
So we normally, as we work in our respective domains, we get associated with the recognition of a brand or a character. So as an editor, do we call you a grammar guru, a plot perfectionist, or a dialogue writer, or a detective kind of a person?
Um, I mean, I think the character that is connected to theme is the one that I'd probably be the one representing. Um, and the one that's like, involved in subtext. I'm very pro subtext. So anything with that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think that's quite fundamental, isn't it? I mean, you can be recognized as whatever character or, grammar guru or something of that. I mean, your basic fundamentals should be in place. So I didn't.
Yeah, good point. I didn't even think that's, yeah, I guess that's where I was going. Yeah.
So if books had blooper reels like movies, what do you think would be the most funniest book bleeper of all time?
That would be very fun to like write a book that's like book bloopers. That'd be cool. I think just seeing the editor's unedited comments to the author would be really interesting. I spent a lot of time going through my comments and making sure that they're helpful and not insulting or harmful in any way. And it's not something that would probably be wise for a group of editors to put out, because I think that would dissuade authors from reaching out to editors to get their books edited. But I think it would be very funny to have a book full of comments that editors have made to authors. And I think that at least for editors, we would all get a good laugh out of it.
Sure, sure. So, if memory goes back, I'm sure you have done several editing work. anything which is very memorable, something, in your praise, someone said, saying that this is by far one of the best, something which comes to your mind, and why?
So there's always a few, and they tend to be the ones I've worked on longest, or the one, the ones I've had the most interaction with the author on. There's I'll pull out one that I haven't really been able to talk about because it only just got published last month.
Yeah.
I believe it's called Running from Yesterday by Margaret Allen, and that's it's more autobiographical because she does start from childhood and then up to like, a certain point in time. But she deals with as a lot of memoirs do, like a very, very heavy topics. And I did a developmental edit with her of going through the book and making sure that, the whole story was there and that what she wanted to say was actually being said. And that was a very interesting encounter in, dealing with very intense work, and respecting that, and also, trying to get that story out and onto the paper in a way that readers would be able to benefit from it. And there's also just some authors who are just a joy and pleasure to work with, and she was one of them, just like a very sweet, very, very sweet person, and very open to the feedback and open to the process. And that was definitely a memorable one. And I believe she took, maybe it was like 8 months. It was a very long time between like the first round and the second round or something, just taking the time to do the revisions, which was, it's a rarity. Usually I give like a month or two. So, but the result was amazing. So, the good things take time.
Absolutely. You said it quite right. And I'm sure when you're going to sit on something similar session about 10 years down the line, you'll have many more praises to share with us, because this is a glorious journey you are on to, and I'm sure a lot of things will happen good only.
That's true.
So this question is, if you had a magic red pen that could instantly fix any writing fox pass in the world, what common mistakes would you eliminate first?
There's so many out there. Um, I think like just the most common that comes to mind, and I think that everyone would love to not have to worry about because it's so common, is just the your versus your, you are versus your. Just it's like I do it all the time. It's so easy for your brain to make that mistake. So I think that if we could just do that without worrying about it, and if it would just like instantly correct, but in the right situations, then that would be nice. Because spell check does not always pick it up. Sometimes you use the wrong one and it, it doesn't notice. So I think that would be cool if that could just not be there.
Sure, sure. I'm sure you agree about one thing, Adina, that there's no end to what we can keep improvising on, whether it is editing, whether it is looking at the book, and every time you read a paragraph, you find something different which you feel can be amended.
Yeah.
Who wins in a battle, between a punctuation and grammar? Whom would you weigh more?
Between punctuation and grammar. I would say grammar would win over punctuation because grammar dictates the punctuation. So, you can't have a comma saying like, oh, I'm better than this adverbial phrase, because it's not, it's attached to it, it follows it. So yeah.
Grammar is crucial. Yeah. So if
Yeah.
you were stranded on a deserted island with only one book, which book would it be, and how would you edit it to keep yourself entertained, really?
It's very hard to pick one book. And I know like a lot of when people are asked questions of like, you get to choose one item and you're stranded on this island, what would you choose? I'm like, there is actually a book called How to Survive on a Deserted Island. That's what I would pick, and I wouldn't edit it. I would just read it and try to survive.
Adina, this is the smartest answer one could have ever given, and you are spot on that, really. So, can you create a fictional book title that perfectly describes your life as a book editor?
Can you give like a genre of, of the book? Like what kind of genre is it?
It can be an autobiography or a memoir, as you say.
If it's a memoir, I would call it Just Trust Me. Uh, yeah. I think that would work. There's others I could come up with, but that's the one that pops into my head.
Sure, sure. So again, this is a very, very interesting question, Adina. If you are stuck with William Shakespeare in an elevator, what would you say to him or ask him?
I would feel very tempted to like quote to be or not to be. But I actually what I would want to know from him is if he enjoyed writing more his plays or his sonnets, because poetry versus screenwriting is just, or script writing is very different. And usually an editor will have a preference either based on like on mood or on a phase of life. So I'm just curious if he was drawn to one more than the other.
Okay. You know what came to my mind when I read this question, Adina? You know, I would have asked probably William Shakespeare that, you said that what's in a name, but you made sure you wrote your name below that statement, and that's how world remembers every time. So that was a very smart move from him. Okay, so that gets us to the last questions, which are over here in front of me. If you could offer one piece of advice to authors looking to work with an editor, what would it be?
So assuming that they have a manuscript and not a rough draft and they're looking for an editor, I would say just ask for a sample edit. Every editor should be able to do that. If they don't want to give you a sample edit, then I would say move on from them. Some editors charge, some editors do not. I personally charge. But every editor should be able to give you a sample of their editing on your work so that you can see what it'll be like. And they should be able to explain what the process will be like and, and tell you, oh, this is the kind of editing that I think that your book needs. So, definitely check that before diving into any contract or anything.
Super, amazing. Thank you so much, Adina. This was wonderful. The number of times I've read these questions, they always excited me. And coming from you, this is absolutely gold dust. I must thank you so much. I will ask the people over here in the room if they wish to unmute and ask questions. We can take a couple of questions. Simon, if you have anything.
I do. Thanks so much, Adina. I follow you on LinkedIn and I'm always very
Thank you.
impressed with your advice and things of that nature. So this is my first question. So you talked about the different types of editing, developmental, line, and things of that nature. Does the fee change when it comes to the different types of editing, or is it just like a flat per hour fee in your contract?
So different editors do different things. For usually there will be a different price point for different types of editing. Some editors will do per word or per hour. I do per project. And it is different for developmental, for line editing, and for proofreading. Proofreading is going to be the cheapest because it is the less time consuming and involved. I actually charge the most for line editing because of how complex it is. And some people charge more for developmental. So, everyone does a different type of thing, but there should be different prices for each one. Yeah.
And so, and when someone comes to you with their manuscript, do you say that to them after you get the sample edit? Like, okay, this looks like it might need like this is my suggestion to you. It needs you need some developmental things going on here, or I can just see that I have to do line and copy editing. Like, do you let them know this? Because they may not be aware what they need when they send you.
Yeah, usually often we'll have some sort of conversation before the sample edit begins, and I'll ask them how, what kind of edit do you think your book needs? So if they have no idea, then I'll be able to explain the types to them.
Here,
But
right.
yeah, exactly. But after I do a sample edit, I'll say, here's what it looks like it needs. And yeah, and then and I always, I have estimates up on my website, so they'll know,
Okay.
how much approximately it'll cost. And then the sample edit lets me give them an accurate quote for their specific work.
Okay, and then just the second question that pertains to the
Mhm.
sample edit. Would a sample edit be one chapter, one paragraph? What should they send you as a sample?
So I ask for the first 20 pages. If it's going to be for a developmental edit, then maybe I'll do up to, the first 30 pages. I'll only do the line edit on the first 5. And then I'll leave comments past that if they're needed. But that gives enough of a look at, what's here, what needs work, what kind of level of editing is needed.
And if you decide to work with them, like if that propels you to
Exactly. Oh yeah.
be
Yeah.
motivated
I mean,
to-
I don't even give a quote if it's not gonna be a good fit.
Right.
Yeah, then I'll give them a couple names of other editors that I would suggest working with.
Okay.
So yeah, sample edit is a huge part of this process for me because I don't want them to have to work with me if they don't want, like the way that I edit their work. I don't want to work with them if I don't feel passionate about what they're working on. So it has to be, mutually happy.
Before committing, right? Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you,
Thank you.
Simone. If you have anyone in the room who want to ask a question with their video on, it'll be great. Otherwise, I can read a couple of questions. Robert, you want to go for it?
Okay. What are some of the best strategies for converting a screenplay into a novel? Do you have any suggestions with that?
That's a great question. I've never done it myself, so I'm not the best person to ask. I have written a screenplay and I've written a novel. I've never tried to turn one into the other. It's obviously been done before.
Awesome.
I think that first off, you need to, the core aspects of a novel obviously should be there. And I think just sketching out an outline and seeing like, how am I going to transfer this over? Because screenplays are much shorter than a novel would be. So you have to, see like, what areas can I expound on that will still fit in the novel, and instead of being like, stooped in, they'll actually be a supporting piece of this novel. So there's definitely ways to do it, and I'm sure that there's resources out there you could look at. But it has been done and it can be done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Is there anyone else, or maybe I can read a question which I see in front of me? It's from, I hope I'm pronouncing the name properly, Shaketa Nikod. She wants to know, do you feel like the age of self-publishing has diminished the quality of books available to read? And what sort of signs can a reader look for to discern the quality of a book before buying?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Self-publishing unfortunately has diminished the quality of books out there. Just from the fact that people can self-publish without getting it professionally edited. So it's there's so many books being put out that are not high quality, unfortunately. And what are signs that you can look for? That read sample page, let's say on Amazon, that you can look at the first few pages. That is a huge indication of what it can be. If you see errors on the first page, which many of them have, then that's a good sign. And then also just the quality of the writing, like read the first few paragraphs and you'll be able to see, is this something that a lot of time was spent on, a lot of revision was spent on, because you really can tell just based on the first page. As a kid going to the library and you have all these options in front of you, my mother would say like, oh, just read the first couple paragraphs and you'll know if you're interested. And there is the concept of you have to wait a chapter or so to see if you're really going to get into it. But if it's a really good book, you're going to be into it from the first page. So, and maybe if not the second page, I don't know, but you should be able to tell fairly quickly, even just from the sample given, that it's on what side of the quality spectrum it's on. And reviews, if there are any reviews on it, that also might be helpful. I wouldn't really put too much stake in reviews though, because readers aren't always so discerning. So, and sometimes the reviews aren't, are from biased people. So it's, make your own decisions.
Sure. Shaketa also wants to know, is there such a thing as a sample edit for a children's book? what would that look like given the fact that they are usually short?
That's a really great question. I don't work on children's books like below middle grade, so I really wouldn't know. There are children's books editors out there. I'm curious to know what their process would be like. I would think that, and again, like I don't know what that process of editing a children's book really is like. I've worked on one, and it was for a vanity publisher. It was a developmental edit, so it's just a very different process and a different experience. But I would think that they would send the whole book and the editor would look at it and just get a baseline of what needs work. And without giving feedback, but just showing them, based on what I saw, here's what I'd recommend. We could have a call about it, that kind of thing. So I think that a sample edit could be done. I just don't think that it would go about in the same way as a novel or any other type of book.
So, I think I have one last question from Peyton, and we can wrap up, keeping in mind time is pressing. What format do you expect when you are given a manuscript? 12-point font, Times New Roman, single space. Is there any particular pattern you follow?
Yeah, I always I have in the contract stipulations of what format it should be in. It needs to be a Word document. It needs to be Times New Roman 12-point font. I usually ask for double spaced. It's not a huge deal either way. I think double space just allows for, when I leave a comment, it just doesn't get as tight and, hard to read everything. But in general, that's usually what I ask for. And also just making sure that there are no previous comments on the document already, that I'm not, going in with other people's thoughts on it. Yeah, they tend to be followed, so it's good.
Even the line spacing is about what, 1.5, 2?
1.5 or 2 is usually fine. Yeah, if it's like single spacing, then that's not as good. Yeah, I think Shakita had one more question.
Yes, can we take that, Adina?
Yeah.
Hi, Adina. I was wondering,
There's some disturbance. Can others mute themselves, please? Todd, I think we are hearing you. Yeah, go on, Shakita, or you can type in the comment box.
actually did, but if you were doing a
Yeah, I'll read that out. I'll read that out, Shakita, because you're not very audible. I think she wants to know if an author wanted a line edit, but their story needed development editing, but they didn't think they need it. Would you still be doing it from the line editing point of view?
That's a good question, and this type of thing does come up. So it's like I got the sample edit. They said they want a line edit. It needs a developmental. So in the follow-up email of giving them that whole what I've discovered based on their sample. So I'll say, like, I think this needs developmental editing, which means that it's not in great shape if it needs developmental editing. And so if they say, oh no, I really just want line editing, then I would say I'm not the editor for them, because I don't want to give them a service that's doing them a disservice to their book. So there are editors that can do that. And listen, like if they just want to get their book out there and they just want someone to edit it for a line edit, that's totally fine. I just don't want to be the one to have to do that. It's really a pain to do a line edit on a book that needs a developmental edit. It's so much more work. You're like, I'm so tempted to like fix things that the author does not want to have fixed. So it's just not going to really work out in the long term.
I agree.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much again, Adina, and for the everyone present in the room. Can't thank you all enough for spending some good quality time over here. Adina, a big thank you once again. Todd, Robert, everyone over here. I would request you all to comment on the post which is on the LinkedIn. That will only help us to grow this wonderful tribe of book publishers and editors and copywriters everywhere. Let's hope that this wonderful publishing world keeps growing, and we see many more books to review, for Adina to edit, and lots of people to read it. Yeah, thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, lovely day ahead. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Adina.
Thank you so much, Raj and Adina. Bye-bye.
for joining.
Bye, Adina.
Thank you so much, you guys. Have a blessed one.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you,
too.
Ron.
Bye-bye.